The vast open steppe of Central Asia was a harsh and unforgiving land. It was a sea of grass under an endless blue sky. Here, the people known as the Mongols lived. They were nomads. They did not build cities of stone. Their homes were round tents called gurs, which they could pack up and move in an hour. Their lives were tied to the rhythm of the seasons and the needs of their herds. They followed their sheep, goats, and horses across the plains, searching for fresh pastures. This constant movement made them hardy and resilient. They learned to read the land, the weather, and the stars. They were born into a world where survival depended on skill, courage, and a deep connection to their environment. Life on the steppe was a constant struggle. The winters were brutally cold, and the summers could be scorching hot. Resources were scarce, and rival tribes often fought over grazing lands and water sources. From a young age, every Mongol child learned to ride a horse. They were said to be able to ride before they could walk. They learned to hunt with a bow and arrow from horseback, developing incredible accuracy and control. This was not just for sport, it was for survival. The skills they honed in their daily lives, horsemanship, archery, and endurance, would become the very foundation of their future military might. They were not soldiers in an army, they were a people whose entire way of life was a form of training. The Mongols saw the world differently from the settled peoples in the south. They did not fear the vast emptiness of the steppe. They saw it as a source of freedom and strength. Their spiritual life was connected to the natural world. They worshipped the eternal blue sky, Tengri, and the golden earth, Etugen. Their social structure was based on the clan and the tribe, with loyalty being the highest virtue. Before the rise of Genghis Khan, these tribes were often divided, fighting amongst themselves. But they shared a common culture, a common language, and a common way of life that made them unique. They were a people waiting for a leader to unite them and unleash their potential upon the world. This nomadic lifestyle created a warrior ethos that was ingrained in their very being. Every man was a soldier, ready to be called upon at a moment's notice. They did not have separate classes of farmers, merchants, and soldiers like the great empires of China or Persia. Everyone contributed to the community, and everyone was expected to defend it. Their wealth was not in gold or land, but in their herds. A man's worth was measured by the number of horses he owned and his skill in riding them. This deep personal connection to their animals and their land gave them a powerful sense of identity and purpose, a spirit forged in the crucible of the steppe. The Mongol horse was not a large and beautiful creature like the war horses of European knights. It was small, sturdy, and incredibly tough. These horses had amazing endurance. They could survive on little water and forage for their own food, even digging through snow to find frozen grass. A Mongol warrior would have a string of several horses, perhaps 3 to 5, which he would rotate during a long march. This allowed him to cover vast distances without tiring his mounts. He could ride for days on end, sleeping in the saddle and drinking mare's milk for sustenance. This mobility was the Mongol army's greatest strategic advantage. They could appear where they were least expected, moving faster than any army before them. The bond between a Mongol warrior and his horse was profound. It was more than just a tool for war. It was a partner in life. The warriors cared for their horses meticulously, understanding that their own survival depended on the animal's well-being. This relationship was built on a lifetime of shared experience, from childhood games to the heat of battle. The horse provided transportation, food in the form of milk and sometimes blood, and a tactical advantage in combat. In return, the warrior gave the horse his care and respect. This symbiotic relationship was the beating heart of the Mongol military machine, a fusion of man and beast that other armies could not comprehend, let alone match. On the battlefield, this partnership translated into unparalleled tactical flexibility. The Mongol warrior was a master of mounted archery. He could fire arrows with deadly accuracy in any direction, even backwards while seemingly in retreat. He used his legs to guide his horse, leaving his hands free to wield his powerful composite bow. This allowed the Mongols to harass their enemies from a distance, peppering them with arrows without engaging in close-quarters combat. They could circle their foes, thinning their ranks and breaking their formations before ever committing to a direct charge. The horse was not just a means to get to the battle. it was an integral part of the fight itself. This reliance on the horse shaped every aspect of Mongol military organization. Their armies were composed entirely of cavalry, divided into light and heavy units. The light cavalry, with their bows and speed, were the skirmishers and scouts. The heavy cavalry, wearing leather or lamellar armor and wielding lances, provided the shock power for the final decisive charge. This all-cavalry force gave them a speed and fluidity that was revolutionary. They did not need long supply trains of slow-moving carts. Their supplies rode with them on their spare horses. The steppe had created the perfect warrior, and the warrior had perfected the use of his greatest asset, the horse. The Mongol art of war was built on a foundation of discipline, speed, and most importantly, psychological terror. They understood that a battle could be won before the first arrow was even fired. One of their most famous and effective tactics was the feigned retreat. Mongol cavalry would charge towards the enemy, engage in a brief skirmish, and then suddenly break and flee in apparent panic. This was a carefully orchestrated maneuver, designed to lure a disciplined enemy formation into a reckless pursuit. The opposing commanders, seeing the Mongols run, would believe they had won and order their troops to give chase, breaking their own ranks in the process. This was the moment the trap would spring. The fleeing Mongol units were not in disarray. They were leading the enemy into a prearranged kill zone. As the pursuing army stretched out and became disorganized, other Mongol forces, hidden on the flanks or behind a hill, would emerge and attack. The original fleeing unit would then turn around and rejoin the fight, completely encircling the surprised and exhausted enemy. This tactic played on the arrogance and overconfidence of their opponents. It turned the enemy's strength, their disciplined formations, into a weakness. The feigned retreat was not a sign of cowardice. It was a mark of supreme confidence and tactical genius. Genghis Khan and his generals were masters of deception on a grand scale. They used spies and scouts extensively to gather intelligence about the enemy's strength, leadership, and the local terrain. They would spread disinformation and rumors to sow fear and confusion. Before a siege, they might send envoys with generous terms of surrender, only to slaughter the population if they refused. This created a reputation for both mercy and utter ruthlessness. Cities in the path of the Mongol advance would often surrender without a fight, terrified by the stories they had heard from refugees. Fear became one of their most powerful weapons, conquering cities before the army even arrived. This psychological warfare was combined with a deep understanding of battlefield control. Mongol commanders used a sophisticated system of signal flags, horns, and whistling arrows to communicate complex orders over long distances. This allowed them to coordinate the movements of tens of thousands of soldiers with precision. An entire wing of the army could be ordered to wheel around or execute a feigned retreat with a single signal. While European armies were often a chaotic mess of individual knights seeking personal glory, the Mongol army operated as a single cohesive unit under the absolute control of its commander. It was this combination of terrifying tactics and iron discipline that made them seem invincible. While the Mongols were masters of open-field cavalry warfare, their greatest challenge came from the great walled cities of China, Persia, and Russia. Nomads had historically struggled against fortified positions. Genghis Khan understood that to build a true empire, he had to conquer these cities. He turned this weakness into a strength by being ruthlessly pragmatic. Instead of inventing new siege technologies himself, he captured engineers and craftsmen from the armies he defeated. He forced Chinese and Persian experts to build and operate sophisticated siege weapons for his army, turning their own technology against them. The Mongol siege train became a terrifying spectacle. They deployed massive trebuchets, giant catapults that could hurl enormous stones, flaming projectiles, and even diseased animal carcasses over city walls to spread pestilence. They built huge siege towers that allowed their warriors to storm the ramparts. They used battering rams to smash through gates and dug tunnels to undermine walls. They would even divert rivers to flood cities or cut off their water supply, starving the inhabitants into submission. Their approach was systematic and relentless. They would surround a city completely, cutting off all hope of escape or reinforcement, and then begin their methodical assault. This technological adaptation was paired with their proven psychological tactics. Before the main assault began, they would often use their archers to rain down a constant shower of arrows on the city's defenders. Among these were special whistling arrows, which created a terrifying, unearthly scream as they flew through the air. The sound was designed to demoralize the defenders, shattering their nerves before the real attack even began. This constant pressure, day and night, wore down the will of the city's inhabitants. The choice became simple: surrender unconditionally or face complete annihilation. There was no middle ground. The Mongols' willingness to learn and adapt was a key to their success. They were not bound by tradition. If a tactic worked, they used it. If a technology was effective, they adopted it. This flexibility made them incredibly dangerous. They combined the mobility of the steppe nomad with the siegecraft of the most advanced sedentary civilizations. They were a hybrid army, the likes of which the world had never seen. They could fight and win in any environment, from the open plains of Hungary to the fortified cities of the Khwarezmian Empire. This ability to overcome any obstacle was what allowed them to build the largest contiguous land empire in history. The rise of the Mongol Empire began with one man, Temujin, who would later be known as Genghis Khan. He was born into a world of tribal warfare and chaos on the Mongolian steppe. Through incredible hardship, charisma, and military skill, he united the warring Mongol and Turkic tribes under his rule. In the year 1206, a great council, or Kurultai, proclaimed him the Great Khan, the ruler of all the people of the felt-walled tents. He did not just conquer his rivals, he absorbed them into a new unified Mongol nation. He created a meritocracy, promoting commanders based on skill and loyalty, rather than noble birth. This created a fiercely loyal and effective military leadership. With the Mongol tribes united, Genghis Khan turned his attention outward. The Mongol conquests began not as a plan for world domination, but as a series of campaigns to secure their borders and punish those who defied them. The initial campaigns were against the Tangut kingdom of Xixia and the Jurchenjin dynasty in northern China. It was here that the Mongols learned the art of siege warfare and the administration of settled populations. They quickly moved west, clashing with the powerful Khwarezmian Empire in Central Asia. The Sultan of Khwarezmia made a fatal error by underestimating the Mongols and executing their envoys, unleashing a wave of destruction that changed the course of history. The Mongol military machine was organized with decimal precision. The entire army was structured in units of 10, called Arban, 100, or Jagun, 1,000, known as Mingan, and 10,000, called Tumen. This simple, logical system made command and control incredibly efficient. Soldiers were bound by a strict code of law known as the Yasa, which demanded absolute loyalty and discipline. If one soldier in an Arban retreated without orders, the entire unit of 10 was executed. This fostered an intense sense of collective responsibility and bravery. The Mongol army moved not as a horde, but as a disciplined, coordinated force, capable of executing complex maneuvers over vast distances. Under Genghis Khan's sons and grandsons, the empire continued to expand at an astonishing rate. His son, Ogedei Khan, established a permanent capital at Karakoram. His grandsons, Batu Khan and Hulegu Khan, led the Mongol armies into Russia and the Middle East. Batu's Golden Horde conquered the principalities of Kievan Rus and pushed into Poland and Hungary, reaching the shores of the Adriatic Sea. Hulegu's Ilkhanate destroyed the Abbasid Caliphate with the sack of Baghdad in 1258. At its height, the Mongol Empire stretched from the Pacific Ocean to the heart of Europe, an immense territory forged and held together by the power of the horse warrior. After the initial period of brutal conquest, the Mongol Empire brought an unprecedented era of peace and stability to the vast lands under its control. This period, from the mid-13th to the mid-14th century, is often called the Pax Mongolica, or the Mongol Peace. The Mongols were not great builders or farmers, but they were superb administrators of their massive empire. They understood the importance of trade and communication. They secured the ancient trade routes like the Silk Road, which had become dangerous and fragmented over centuries of conflict. Under Mongol rule, these routes became safe for merchants, missionaries, and travelers for the first time in generations. the Mongols established a highly efficient postal relay system known as the Yam. This system consisted of a network of well-stocked stations placed about a day's ride apart across the entire empire. Official messengers, carrying a seal of authority called a paisa, could travel with great speed, changing to fresh horses at each station. This allowed the Great Khan to send decrees and receive intelligence from the farthest corners of his empire in a matter of weeks. The Yam was the nervous system of the empire, binding its disparate parts together. It also made travel safer and faster for merchants, who could use the system for a fee, further encouraging long-distance trade. This newfound security had a profound effect on commerce. For the first time, goods, ideas, and technologies could move freely between China, the Middle East, and Europe. A merchant could travel from Venice to Beijing with a single Mongol passport, knowing he was protected. The Mongols themselves encouraged trade. They did not have their own artisan class, so they valued the goods and skills of the peoples they conquered. They standardized weights and measures, lowered tolls, and even introduced paper money to facilitate commerce on a large scale. The result was a boom in international trade that linked the economies of East and West like never before. The saying "a maiden bearing a nugget of gold on her head could wander safely throughout the realm" became a popular way to describe the safety of the Mongol lands. While this may be an exaggeration, it captures the essence of the Pax Mongolica. The same military discipline that made the Mongol army so formidable was used to police the trade routes. Brigands and thieves were hunted down and punished severely. The peace imposed by the Mongol Khans created a single, enormous free trade zone. This unified world system laid the groundwork for the modern global economy, connecting distant civilizations in a web of commerce and communication that would permanently alter the world. The Pax Mongolica did more than just facilitate the trade of silk and spices. It created a highway for the exchange of ideas, technologies, and cultures. Under the tolerant rule of the Mongols, who were largely indifferent to the religions of their subjects, as long as they paid their taxes, people of different faiths and backgrounds mingled freely. Nestorian Christians, Muslims, Buddhists, and Taoists all traveled the Silk Road, establishing communities in new lands and sharing their beliefs. The Mongol capital at Karakorum was a surprisingly cosmopolitan city, where churches, mosques, and temples stood side by side. This religious tolerance was a matter of practical policy, but it fostered a unique environment of cultural cross-pollination. Technological innovations spread across Eurasia with astonishing speed. Gunpowder, invented in China, traveled west along the Mongol trade routes. It would eventually revolutionize warfare in Europe, contributing to the end of the age of castles and knights. The magnetic compass, another Chinese invention, also made its way to Europe, where it would enable the great age of discovery. Printing technology, paper money, and playing cards were other Eastern innovations that were introduced to the West during this period. The exchange was not one way. Persian astronomical knowledge and medical texts flowed east to China, enriching its scientific traditions. This exchange also included artistic styles and scientific knowledge. Chinese painting techniques, particularly the use of landscapes and certain motifs like dragons and phoenixes, began to appear in Persian miniature paintings. In return, Persian cobalt blue became a prized element in Chinese porcelain, creating the iconic blue and white pottery that would become famous around the world. The Mongols established observatories in both Persia and China, and astronomers from both civilizations worked together, sharing charts and calculations. This blending of knowledge pushed the boundaries of science and art in both the East and the West. Perhaps the most famous traveler to benefit from the Mongol peace was the Venetian merchant, Marco Polo. His journey to the court of Kublai Khan in China and his subsequent book, The Travels of Marco Polo, gave Europeans their first detailed glimpse into the incredible wealth and sophistication of the East. While some of his accounts were met with disbelief, they fired the imagination of Europeans and inspired future explorers, including Christopher Columbus. Marco Polo was just one of thousands of individuals who traveled across the Mongol Empire, each one a thread in the vast tapestry of cultural exchange that the Mongols had woven across the continent. The Mongol Empire itself was relatively short-lived. By the late 14th century, internal divisions, struggles over succession, and assimilation into the cultures they had conquered led to its fragmentation and eventual collapse. The Yuan dynasty in China was overthrown by the native Ming dynasty. The Ilkhanate in Persia disintegrated. The Golden Horde in Russia slowly lost its power to the rising Principality of Moscow. Yet, the world the Mongols left behind was fundamentally different from the one they had found. Their impact was so profound that its echoes can still be felt today in the political and cultural geography of the modern world. One of the most significant legacies of the Mongol Empire was the creation of new nations and the redefinition of old ones. In Russia, 2 centuries of Mongol rule, known as the Tatar Yoke, had a transformative effect. It cut Russia off from Western Europe, but it also forced the scattered Russian principalities to unite. The rise of Moscow as the center of a new unified Russian state was a direct consequence of its role as the primary tribute collector for the Mongol Khans. When Mongol power waned, Moscow was perfectly positioned to fill the vacuum and build the foundation of the modern Russian Empire. In China, the Mongol Yuan dynasty, established by Kublai Khan, united the north and south of the country for the first time in centuries. Although seen as foreign rulers, they adopted many Chinese administrative practices. Their decision to make Beijing, then called Dadu, their capital established it as the political center of China, a role it has maintained to this day. In the Middle East, the Mongol destruction of the old Abbasid Caliphate in Baghdad and the Seljuk Sultanate in Anatolia cleared the way for the rise of new powers, most notably the Ottoman Empire, which would go on to dominate the region for centuries. The Mongol conquests also reshaped global demographics and even biology. Their campaigns caused massive population shifts, both through destruction and forced relocation of artisans and specialists. Their vast network of trade and communication also had a dark side. The Pax Mongolica that allowed goods and ideas to travel so freely also provided the perfect transmission route for the Black Death. The plague, which likely originated in Central Asia, traveled along the Mongol trade routes, reaching the Black Sea and then spreading into Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa with devastating consequences, killing a significant portion of the world's population. In conclusion, the horse lords of Eurasia were far more than just brutal conquerors. They were agents of historical change on a scale the world had never seen. Starting as a collection of nomadic tribes on the vast Mongolian steppe, they used their unparalleled military genius, a combination of horsemanship, discipline, and innovative tactics, to forge the largest contiguous land empire in history. Their military success was not based on overwhelming numbers, but on superior organization, speed, and a willingness to adapt and learn from the peoples they conquered. The image of the Mongol warrior on his sturdy horse remains one of the most powerful symbols of military might in human history. The empire they built did more than just redraw the political map of the world. It reconnected it. The Pax Mongolica created a bridge between East and West, a continental system of free trade and communication that fostered an unprecedented exchange of goods, technologies, and ideas. Gunpowder, the compass, and printing moved from east to west, while science and art flowed in both directions. This great exchange broke down centuries of isolation between civilizations, creating a more interconnected world and laying the essential groundwork for the modern era of global interaction that would follow. While the empire itself eventually crumbled, its legacy is embedded in the DNA of the modern world. It shaped the formation of nations like Russia and China, altered the balance of power in the Middle East, and indirectly spurred Europe's age of discovery as explorers sought new sea routes to the riches of the East after the land-based Silk Road became fragmented again. The Mongols demonstrated that the world was not a series of isolated regions, but a single, interconnected whole. They were, in a very real sense, the architects of a new global consciousness. Therefore, when we look back at the Mongol Empire, we see a pivotal moment in the story of humanity. Genghis Khan and his descendants did not just conquer the world, they remade it. They were a storm that swept across the Eurasian continent, breaking down old walls and forging new connections. Their story is a powerful reminder that history is often shaped by those on the margins, and that a small group of determined people, masters of their environment and open to new ideas, can change the world forever. The horse lords of the steppe galloped out of obscurity, and in doing so, created the first draft of our modern, globalized world.